Welcome back to the shop and to the channel. Well, this week I want to make a little more progress on getting the surface grinder back together. I want to get the motor mounted and see if that noise that I think the fan was making, see if that's been solved or not. Well, before I put the motor on, I need to get the vertical lead screw back on, and that's going to start by getting the nut remounted on the spindle carrier. At least that's what I'm calling this thing. I'm fairly confident that somebody before me had this thing disassembled at one point. There's a couple of roll pins that are supposed to be used to position this feed nut, and these roll pins were pushed all the way out before I had started disassembly of it. And I pushed them back in from the front of the spindle carrier, and I think they're in a little bit too far now. So I need to push them back out, and then, at least enough to where I can still get the nut mounted, and then I'll reseat them once I get the nut fastened to the spindle carrier. Well, with that nut now mounted, I'll put a little bit of oil inside of it and then start threading the lead screw down in from the top. Well, with the lead screw now in place, I also reinstalled the bearings that were underneath the bevel gear. I can go ahead and install the handle that the pinion attaches to in order to actually raise and lower the spindle. I need to get the hole for the roll pin aligned, and I think the easiest way to do this is I'm going to take a rag here and just kind of jam it between the pinion and the bevel gear, and that'll hold that in place while I'm able to turn the hand wheel, and that spins the shaft. It's a pretty tight fit between the pinion and that shaft, so this should enable me to get those lined up so I can drive that roll pin into place. There's this locking collar that sits on the shaft just behind the pinion gear, and its purpose really is to take out the lateral play in this hand wheel. So I just need to kind of wedge them apart so I can take out all that extra space before I tighten the set screws. Well, that's all back together and feels pretty good. I'll just put a little bit of whey oil here on the vertical spaces and move on to the next step. Well, the next up is this motor shelf that attaches to the back of the spindle carrier. There's 4 socket head cap screws that attach it, that fasten it to the back of it. I'll just put these in here loosely for now because this will also affect the tension on the belt between the motor and the spindle pulley. So I'm going to wait until I get the motor on and get that all set before I tighten these down. Well, I've ordered a new belt, but it hasn't arrived yet, so I'm going to use the old one on here for now. I'll get the motor here set into place and get the pulley over top of that belt. Well, with the motor shelf now taking the weight of the motor and the belt tensioned up, a little bit loose, it will tighten once I fasten the motor down to the shelf, but I should be able to tighten the socket head cap screws that attach the shelf to the back of the spindle. Well, the motor is putting a little bit of weight on the belt. I think it will stretch a little, but in the meantime, I'll go ahead and install the screws here that fasten the motor down to the shelf, and then try to get it lined up to be in line with the spindle pulley. It doesn't have to be perfectly in line. It really doesn't matter, but it'd be nice to at least get it close. Now I can go ahead and snug up these other bolts on that motor shelf to where everything's sort of sitting where it kind of naturally wants to be. With the motor mounted now, I need to rerun the wiring through the base here, and I want to remake the grommets that were in through these holes. Need to figure out the length, so I just made this little hook out of some welding TIG rod, and that'll give me an idea here. This is about 1 inch into the base of the machine, so as long as I make the grommet about that length, it should be good. The one here over on the side of the base is a little bit longer. Well, I believe the original grommets were made from some kind of phenolic resin material, and I don't have any of that, in at least not in a rod form. So I do have some black and white Delrin, so I chose this white Delrin because it was already as pipe. It was already drilled down the center, so it should be fairly easy to machine some new grommets from this. Well, you might recall when I disassembled this, I put this string where the motor wire was, and I'm certainly glad that I put that string in there, because it certainly made it a heck of a lot easier to fish this wire in through the base. It's really not accessible from underneath. It might have been more accessible had I not put the saddle on the machine, but since it's on there, I'm not going to take it back off. I'm going to use the string to fish it through, and it was kind of a pain, but it actually worked out pretty good. I was able to get it through without a whole lot of cursing anyway. Well, the grommets I made are a nice tight fit, maybe a little bit too tight, but let's see. I'll just hammer this one here in. Hopefully I don't break it. And, you know, if I do, I can always make another one. But I think this is going to go in pretty good. I think the ID of this could have been a little bit tighter for the wire, but I'm not too unhappy with how this came out. Oops. Not what I wanted. Well, this front one, for whatever reason, came out a little bit tighter than I would have liked. I had actually ended up chipping off a little bit of the grommet, but you know, it is what it is. With these in now, I can go ahead and rewire up the drum switch, and we'll do that off camera. Well, I got the drum switch wired up and connected to power, and as you could hear there, it still made a pretty strange noise in the motor, which again, I believe is going to be attributed to that fan. Is, you know, it's not pressed onto the back of that motor shaft, so it's the motor starts spinning, the fan is kind of catching up, and I think that's where that noise is coming from. Well, I got the motor back off of the motor shelf here. I'm going to take this end bell cover off and see if we can't figure out a way to keep that fan from spinning off on its own. With the bell housing off and the snap ring off, taking a look at this fan, yeah, there's a little bit of play between the fan and that motor shaft, but resolving that might be a bit of a difficult task. And this wavy washer that's back here, it might be a little bit worn out. You know, it's kind of hard to say, but I think I'm going to try, instead of, you know, machining the fan, I think I'm going to put a spacer here behind the wavy washer and see if that might provide a little bit more pressure, and maybe that extra friction will keep this fan spinning with the motor shaft. Well, I'll take a couple of quick measurements here just to make sure I get this diameter correct. It doesn't need to be perfect, but I think we'll chuck up some aluminum in the lathe and make a little spacer here. I'll do that off camera. Well, I made up this little spacer about 60 thousandths wide. I'll put it behind the wavy washer here, and I'm hoping that that little extra pressure that the wavy washer applies to the fan, to the snap ring, will be enough to keep it in place when the motor spins up. Probably should look at doing something a little more permanent, but I think this will at least keep the noise down. It doesn't really affect the operation of the motor or even the fan once it gets spinning. It's just kind of annoying. Well, let's go ahead and give this a try, see how it sounds.
Well, it's certainly a lot quieter.
Yeah, that is certainly a lot quieter. I think it's going to do what I need it to do. So I think we'll go ahead and button this thing back up and get the motor remounted. With motor reinstalled, next thing I'm going to do here is put the way covers back on the saddle. These covers that go on the rear have a Gets oil cup on them. Put a little whey oil in here to help keep the saddle ways lubricated. There's a hole in the top of this bevel gear that lubricates the thrush washer underneath it, as well as the vertical lead screw. I had to go back and look at the disassembly video to try to figure out how these covers are supposed to go back on over the spindle. I'm not sure I have it correct still, but I suppose as long as all of the gaps are covered when the spindle goes up and down, it doesn't really matter what order they land in. The last cover that goes on is this top one that covers that top bevel gear. There's a Gits oil cup at the top to oil it, keep that lead screw lubricated. And it just mounts with some countersunk cap screws. Well, it's starting to look like a surface grinder again. But I do know that there is still quite a bit of work I have to do before I can really put it to any serious use, or really even to take any test grinds. I currently don't have any means to capture any of the grinding dust. I'm thinking about putting something there on the left side of the table that I might be able to use to hang a rag on or something like that. But right now I don't have anything. I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do there. Well, the saddle and the table are working great. I do need to clean up the mag chuck yet, but I also want to take a grind on the base before I put the mag chuck back down. And before I can do any kind of grinding whatsoever, I still need to have a proper cover for the grinding wheel. Before I can even put a grinding wheel on here, I still need to get one and mount it to a hub, but then I also need to have the tool that you need in order to remove it. So there's still more to come, and if you want to see how these things go, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you're not already a subscriber. Hit that like button if you enjoyed the video. Drop me down a comment, let me know what you think. And another special thank you to all those that are supporting this channel financially through either PayPal or Patreon. I seriously could not do this without your help. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.